Clara Thompson, a waitress struggling to support her daughter, finds herself face to face with the man who humiliated her years ago, a wealthy, arrogant millionaire, now in a desperate situation. What happens next will change their lives forever. You won't believe the twist that's coming. Before we begin the story, please comment below on where you're watching from, and if you've ever had an unexpected reunion. Let's get to the story. Clara Thompson looked out the window of the Café da Esperança, watching the lights of Manhattan twinkle like stars on an endless night. The aroma of fresh coffee and the soft sound of conversations filled the air, but for Clara, everything felt distant. With a warm smile, she served the customers, but inside, a storm of emotions consumed her. Since her husband's death, life had become a constant struggle, and each day was a battle to support her daughter, Lily, who was now just 5 years old. "Another coffee, please," shouted a customer, interrupting her thoughts. Clara quickly turned, grabbing the pot and pouring the hot liquid into the cup. As she served, her eyes met those of a man who had just entered, Richard Harrington. He was everything Clara was not: wealthy, arrogant, and seemingly without limits. The real estate mogul had a presence that dominated the room, and Clara felt a chill run down her spine as she realized he was approaching. "You must be the slowest waitress in New York," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I don't have all day." The nervous laughter of the other customers echoed through the cafe, and Clara felt her face flush. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm here to help," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. But the humiliation hit her like a punch to the stomach. She forced herself to smile, but the pain in her heart was palpable. Richard continued to make cruel remarks, each word a knife cutting deeper. Clara looked down at the floor, trying to ignore the laughter around her. What he didn't know was that behind her facade of strength was a broken woman struggling to stay afloat. After the incident, Clara locked herself in the cafe's bathroom, tears streaming down her face. "Why did I let this happen?" she thought, as she looked at herself in the mirror. The reflection was of a woman who had lost hope but was still fighting for her daughter. "I can't let this define me," she whispered to herself, wiping away her tears. That night, while Lily slept, Clara made a decision. She could no longer live in the shadow of humiliation. New York had become a place of pain and memories, and she needed a fresh start. With a heavy heart but determined spirit, Clara began to plan her escape to Cape May, a small coastal town in New Jersey, where she hoped to find peace and a new beginning. "I'm going to do this for you, Lily," she promised, looking at her sleeping daughter. "We're going to find a place where we can be happy again." In the days that followed, Clara worked even harder at the cafe, saving every penny she could. She dreamed of life in Cape May, where the ocean waves could wash away her sorrows, and where she could start anew. But each day, the memory of Richard haunted her. He was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in her life, and the thought of encountering him again made her uneasy. One morning, while serving tables, Clara overheard a conversation between two customers. "Have you seen Richard Harrington's new project? He's building a skyscraper downtown," said a woman. "They say he's unbeatable." Her words cut like a knife. Clara felt a knot form in her stomach. Richard Harrington, always on top, always making others feel small. She stepped away, trying to ignore the pain his words caused. "I am no longer a victim," she thought, determined not to let him affect her again. Finally, the day of departure arrived. Clara packed her belongings into a battered suitcase. She looked around the small apartment she had shared with her husband, remembering the happy moments they had lived there. But now, all that remained were painful memories. "It's time to move on," she murmured to herself. When Clara and Lily arrived at the train station, Clara's heart was heavy but also filled with hope. "Let's start a new life, my little one," she said, holding her daughter's hand. Lily smiled, not fully understanding the gravity of the situation but sensing her mother's determination. The train departed, and Clara looked out the window as the city faded away. The lights of New York receded, along with the memories of pain and humiliation. Cape May, here we come, she thought, feeling a wave of relief and anticipation. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to fight for a better future for herself and Lily. Cape May was a world apart, a refuge of tranquility and natural beauty that starkly contrasted with the hustle and bustle of New York. Clara and Lily arrived on a sunny day, with the fresh scent of the sea in the air and the sound of waves gently breaking on the shore. Clara felt a surge of hope as she looked at the horizon, where the sky met the ocean. This is where we're going to start over, she thought, smiling at Lily, who was enchanted by the new town. In the first few days, Clara dedicated herself to finding a job. She knew she needed to work hard to support her daughter, but the idea of leaving behind the pain of New York still haunted her. With determination, she applied at various cafes and restaurants until she finally landed a position at a small seaside bistro called The Refuge. The atmosphere was welcoming, and Clara soon felt at home. The customers were friendly, and the owner, a kind man named Tom, welcomed her with open arms. "You're going to love working here, Clara. The people are good and life is more peaceful," he said, smiling. Clara thanked him, feeling that she had finally found a place where she could be happy. As Clara adapted to her new routine, she began to explore the town with Lily. They strolled along the beach, collecting seashells and building sandcastles. Each laugh from Lily was like music to Clara's ears, and she felt lighter with each passing day. However, even amidst the happiness, the emotional scars of humiliation still lingered, like shadows that followed her. One morning, while working at the bistro, Clara had an unexpected encounter. A group of tourists entered, and among them was a woman who looked familiar. As she approached, Clara realized it was an old co-worker from New York. "Clara, is that you?" the woman exclaimed, her face lighting up with a radiant smile. "What are you doing here?" Clara hesitated, recalling her former life and the pain she had left behind. "I'm starting over," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. The woman, however, didn't notice the tension in her voice. "You won't believe it. Richard Harrington is in New York, and he's in trouble. He's lost everything." The woman's words hit Clara like a bolt of lightning. Richard Harrington, the man who had humiliated her, was now in distress. A mix of emotions flooded her: relief, anger, and somehow a hint of compassion. "What happened?" she asked, trying to hide her interest. "He invested in a project that went wrong. Now his reputation is ruined, and he's trying to salvage what he can. People are saying he's desperate," the woman said, a glimmer of curiosity in her eyes. Clara felt a knot form in her stomach. The idea of Richard Harrington, the man who had made her feel so small, now in a vulnerable position, was almost surreal. "I don't care about him," Clara said, trying to convince herself. But deep down, a part of her was intrigued. In the days that followed, Clara couldn't stop thinking about Richard. Life in Cape May was peaceful, but the memory of her humiliation still haunted her. She wondered if he had truly changed, or if he was still the same arrogant man he had always been. Curiosity consumed her, and at the same time, she felt guilty for thinking about him. One night while at home, Clara decided she needed answers. "If he's in trouble, maybe I should know more," she thought. With her heart racing, she picked up the phone and began researching Richard Harrington. The news was alarming. He had lost his fortune, his reputation was in ruins, and his family had abandoned him. "He deserves this," Clara murmured to herself, but a part of her felt a strange empathy. No one deserves to go through that. The internal struggle left her confused. How could she feel compassion for someone who had hurt her so deeply? That night, Clara had trouble sleeping. Images of Richard on his knees begging for help began to surface in her mind. What would I do if I were in his place, she pondered. The idea of helping someone who had wounded her was unsettling, but at the same time she knew that life was full of twists and turns. As the sun rose on the horizon, Clara made a decision. If Richard Harrington was truly in trouble, perhaps it was time to confront her past. "I can't let fear control me," she told herself, determined to face whatever came next. The days in Cape May passed quickly, and Clara began to feel more comfortable in her new life. The bistro had become a second home, and the peaceful routine alongside Lily brought a relief she hadn't known she needed. However, the shadow of Richard Harrington still loomed over her, like a cloud that wouldn't dissipate. One morning, while setting up the tables at the bistro, Clara overheard a conversation between two customers. "Have you seen the latest news about Richard? He's really in trouble. They say he's trying to recover his fortune, but no one wants to do business with him now," one woman commented. Clara's heart raced. The curiosity and compassion she felt for Richard left her restless. "He deserves this," Clara thought, trying to convince herself. But at the same time, a part of her wondered if he had truly changed. People can transform, can't they? She reflected, remembering her own journey of overcoming. That night, while Lily slept, Clara sat at the kitchen table, lost in thought. The memories of New York and the humiliation she suffered still tormented her. "I can't let this define me," she whispered to herself, but doubt lingered. What if Richard really was remorseful? What if he needed help? The idea of returning to New York terrified her. The city that had once been her home now represented pain and shame, but at the same time, Clara felt she needed to confront her past. "If I don't do this now, I'll never be able to move on," she thought, determined not to let fear control her. The next morning, Clara woke up with renewed determination. She knew she needed to go back to New York, not just to confront Richard, but also to free herself from the chains that bound her to the past. "I'm going to do this for myself and for Lily," she told herself as she prepared breakfast. After a day of work at the bistro, Clara began to plan her trip. She saved every penny, determined to buy a train ticket back to the city that had hurt her. The thought of seeing Richard again made her nervous, but she knew she had to do it. "I'm not the same woman he humiliated," she thought, feeling stronger with each passing day. Finally, the day of departure arrived. Clara said goodbye to Tom and her co-workers, promising she would return. "You're a strong woman, Clara. Go and face what needs to be faced," Tom said, with a supportive look. Clara smiled, feeling grateful to have found such good people in her new life. As the train departed, Clara looked out the window, watching the landscape change. The waves of Cape May receded, and with them, the sense of security she had found. "What am I going to find in New York?" she thought, her heart racing. But at the same time, a wave of courage enveloped her. "I'm going to face my past and, if necessary, help Richard." Upon arriving at the train station in New York, Clara felt a mix of emotions. The city was as alive as ever, but to her, everything seemed different. The streets were filled with hurried people, and the noise of cars and sirens enveloped her like a familiar cloak. Yet, at the same time, the pain of memories hit her like a blow. Clara took a deep breath and began to walk through the streets she once knew so well. Each step took her back to moments she would rather forget, but she was determined not to let that paralyze her. "I am stronger now," she repeated to herself as she headed to the Café da Esperanza. When she arrived at the cafe, her heart raced. The place was still there, but it seemed smaller than she remembered. Clara hesitated at the door, recalling the humiliation she had suffered. But at the same time, she felt a wave of determination. "I am no longer the same woman," she thought, pushing the door open and stepping inside. The cafe was crowded, and Clara quickly felt the weight of curious gazes upon her. Eyes turned toward her, and the memory of Richard haunted her. "What if he's here?" she thought, her heart racing. But as she looked around, she didn't see him. A momentary relief washed over her, but it was soon replaced by anxiety. Clara approached the counter and ordered a coffee. The barista recognized her and smiled. "Clara, it's been so long. What are you doing here?" he asked, a sparkle in his eyes. Clara smiled shyly, but her mind was elsewhere. "I need to find Richard," she thought, determined to confront the man who had changed her life forever. Clara took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions consuming her. The Café da Esperanza still had the same charm, but now it was a place laden with painful memories. As the barista prepared her coffee, Clara looked around, remembering every laugh, every tear, and every humiliation she had faced there. but at the same time, she felt that she had changed. I am no longer the same woman he humiliated, she thought. Determined to stand firm, after grabbing her coffee, Clara decided she needed to find Richard. The idea of confronting him made her nervous, but the need to close that chapter of her life was stronger. Where could he be now? She asked herself, as she walked through the streets she once knew so well. She recalled the news she had heard about Richard. He had lost everything, and the thought of seeing him in a vulnerable situation intrigued her. Maybe he has changed, she thought, but quickly corrected herself. He can't change. He is who he is. The internal struggle left her confused, but Clara was determined to discover the truth. After a few hours of searching, Clara finally found Richard's address. He lived in a modest apartment, far from the luxury he used to flaunt. This is a sign, she thought, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. He is no longer the man I once knew. With her heart racing, Clara climbed the stairs to Richard's floor. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she knew she had to do this. Upon reaching the door, she hesitated for a moment. What if he doesn't want to see me? What if he's still the same Richard as before? She thought, but determination pushed her to knock on the door. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, the door opened. Richard stood there with a look of surprise and confusion. He looked older, with deep circles under his eyes and a weary expression. "Clara," he said, disbelief evident in his voice. "Hi, Richard," Clara replied, trying to keep calm. "We need to talk." Richard invited her in, and Clara hesitated for a moment before crossing the threshold. The apartment was simple, with worn furniture and an atmosphere of neglect. He really has fallen, Clara thought, feeling a wave of compassion mixed with anger. "I didn't expect to see you here," Richard said, closing the door behind her. "What are you doing in New York?" "I came to see how you were doing," Clara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I heard about what happened." Richard looked her in the eyes, and Clara saw a mix of pain and regret in his gaze. "I am not the man you once knew," he said, his voice low. "I've lost everything, my family, my job, everything." Clara felt a tightness in her heart. The idea of Richard, the man who had humiliated her, now in such a vulnerable position, left her confused. "You did terrible things, Richard," she said, anger beginning to resurface. "You made me feel small, insignificant." "I know," he replied, his voice trembling. "And I deeply regret it. I didn't know how to handle what was happening. In my life, I was arrogant and insensitive, but now I see things differently." Clara hesitated. The sincerity in his voice touched her, but the wounds of the past were still open. "Why should I believe you?" she asked, pain evident in her words. "Because I'm here trying to rebuild myself," Richard said with a desperate look. "I need help. And more importantly, I need someone to show me what empathy is. I don't know how to do this alone." Richard's vulnerability surprised her. Clara remembered her own struggle and how she had found strength in moments of weakness. "Maybe I can help," she said hesitantly. "But that doesn't mean I've forgotten what you did." "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately," Richard replied sincerely. "But I want to try to redeem myself, and if you let me, I would like to learn from you." Clara felt a wave of conflicting emotions. The anger and pain were still present, but the idea of helping someone who had suffered the same pain she had touched her. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said, her voice trembling. "I understand," Richard replied with a look of understanding. "But I am willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I have changed." Clara looked at him, weighing his words. "If I decide to help you, it will be a long process. It won't be easy," she said, determined to set boundaries. "I'm ready for that," Richard said, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I just need a chance." Clara took a deep breath, feeling she was on the brink of a new journey. "Then let's get started," she said, resolved to confront the past and help Richard find his way back. Days turned into weeks, and Clara and Richard began working together on his journey of redemption. Clara dedicated herself to helping him rebuild his life. But with each step, she also faced her own demons. The connection between them grew, but the scars of the past were still fresh, and Clara struggled to balance compassion with the pain Richard had caused. One morning, while Clara was organizing some things in Richard's home, she received a call that would change everything. It was a nurse from the hospital, informing her that her mother had been admitted due to a serious health complication. Clara's heart raced. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. "She had an accident and is in critical condition. We need you to come as soon as possible," the nurse said, and Clara felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. "I'm on my way now," she replied, hanging up the phone with her mind in turmoil. Clara turned to Richard, who was sitting on the sofa, looking at her with concern. "What happened?" he asked, noticing the change in her face. "My mother. She's in the hospital. I need to go," Clara said, her voice choked. Richard immediately stood up, his expression turning serious. "I'm going with you." "No, you don't have to," Clara replied, trying to maintain her composure. "This is something I need to do alone." "Clara, you're not alone. I want to help," Richard insisted, and the sincerity in his voice touched her. She hesitated, but the thought of facing this tragedy alone frightened her even more. "Okay," Clara said, finally agreeing, "but we need to go now." The drive to the hospital was silent, with Clara lost in her thoughts. Worry for her mother consumed her, and the idea of losing another loved one left her distressed. Richard, beside her, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, and his presence was an unexpected comfort. When they arrived at the hospital, Clara felt a knot form in her stomach. The smell of disinfectant and the tense atmosphere enveloped her, and she remembered all the times she had been there before when her husband was ill. "Why is this happening again?" she thought, anxiety rising. Clara and Richard were greeted by a nurse who led them to her mother's room. Upon entering, Clara saw her mother lying in bed, pale and fragile. Her heart broke at the sight of the woman who had always been her rock, now so vulnerable. "Mom!" she exclaimed, rushing to the bedside. "Clara, dear," her mother said with a faint smile. "I'm okay, just a little tired." Tears streamed down Clara's face as she held her mother's hand. "You're not okay." "What happened?" she asked, her voice choked. "It was just an accident, dear." "I'm here now," her mother replied, trying to reassure her. But Clara knew the situation was serious, and the uncertainty consumed her. Richard stayed in the background, observing the scene with an understanding look. He knew that this moment was sacred and respected Clara's space. But at the same time, he felt a deep pain for her. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. After a few minutes, Clara turned to Richard, who was leaning against the door with a worried expression. "Can you stay here? I don't want to be alone," she asked, vulnerability evident in her voice. "Of course," Richard replied, moving closer and sitting beside her. He held Clara's hand, offering silent support. His presence calmed her, and she felt grateful not to be alone in this difficult moment. Hours passed, and Clara stayed by her mother's side, talking and holding her hand. Richard remained there, respecting their space but always ready to offer a smile or a gesture of support. The connection between them grew stronger with each moment, and Clara began to realize that, despite her past, Richard was becoming an important part of her life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a doctor entered the room. "Clara, we need to talk," he said with a serious look. Clara's heart raced. "What happened? Is my mother going to be okay?" "We're doing everything we can, but she needs intensive care. The situation is delicate," the doctor explained, and Clara felt the world crumble around her. "I can't lose anyone else," she thought, the pain becoming unbearable. Richard, sensing Clara's anguish, held her hand tighter. "You're not alone, Clara, I'm here," he said. And for the first time, Clara felt that maybe she could trust him. "Thank you," Clara murmured, feeling a wave of gratitude. "I don't know what I would do without you." As night fell, Clara and Richard remained together, facing uncertainty and pain. The connection between them grew stronger, and Clara realized that even amidst tragedy, there was room for hope and redemption. The night in the hospital dragged on, and Clara felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The tension in the air was palpable, and the uncertainty about her mother's health left her restless. Richard stayed by her side, offering silent support, but Clara knew he was also grappling with his own feelings. His presence was an unexpected comfort, but the pain of past humiliation still loomed over her like a shadow. When the sun began to rise, Clara decided she needed some fresh air. "I'm going to take a walk outside," she said to Richard, who watched her with concern. "I'll be fine, I just need a moment." Richard nodded, but Clara noticed the hesitation in his gaze. "If you need me, I'll be here," he said, and Clara smiled, grateful for his presence. As Clara stepped out of the hospital, she felt the cool morning breeze on her face. The sky was clear, and the city was beginning to wake up. But even with the beauty around her, Clara couldn't shake the worry for her mother. "Why is this happening?" she thought as she walked through the familiar streets. As she walked, Clara got lost in thought, reflecting on her life and the choices she had made. The pain of the humiliation she suffered at Richard's hands felt distant, yet the memory of who he was left her confused. "He's not the same man anymore," she thought, but doubt lingered. Suddenly, Clara heard a familiar voice calling her name. "Clara, is that you?" Turning around, she saw an old co-worker from New York, Sarah, approaching. "What are you doing here?" "Hi, Sarah, I'm here because of my mother. She's in the hospital," Clara replied, trying to maintain her composure. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I hope she gets better," Sarah said, concern in her eyes. "But you won't believe what happened to Richard." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened?" she asked, curiosity and anxiety mixing. "He's in a terrible situation. He lost everything and is trying to get back on his feet, but people won't accept him anymore. He's desperate," Sarah explained, and Clara felt a wave of empathy. "He needs help," she thought, remembering how vulnerable Richard had shown himself the last time they met. I know," Clara said hesitantly. "I'm trying to help him." Sarah looked at her in surprise. "You? After everything he did to you?" "I know he hurt me, but people can change," Clara replied, feeling the need to defend Richard. "He's trying to redeem himself." "If you say so. But be careful, Clara. He might not be who you think he is," Sarah warned. And Clara felt a knot form in her stomach. "I know," she replied, but doubt consumed her. After their conversation, Clara decided to return to the hospital. Upon entering, she found Richard sitting in the waiting room, looking worried. "You took a while," he said, standing up when he saw her. "I ran into a friend," Clara replied, trying to hide the confusion she felt. "She told me about you." Richard looked her in the eyes, and Clara saw vulnerability in his gaze. "What did she say?" he asked, his voice tense. "She said you're in trouble, that people aren't willing to help you," Clara replied, feeling the need to be honest. "It's true," Richard said with a heavy sigh. "I don't know how to get back on my feet. The people I thought were my friends abandoned me." Clara felt a wave of compassion. "You're not alone, Richard. I'm here to help you," she said. Determination. Her voice. "I don't deserve your help," he replied, pain evident in his words. "I've done terrible things." "We all make mistakes," Clara said, recalling her own journey. "What matters is learning from them and trying to do better." Richard looked at her with gratitude, and Clara realized that despite everything, there was a growing connection between them. "Thank you for not abandoning me," he said, sincerity in his voice touching Clara's heart. "I won't abandon you," Clara replied, feeling she was beginning to understand the true meaning of empathy. "But you need to be willing to change." I am willing," Richard said, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I want to be a better person." As they talked, Clara realized that even amidst tragedy, there was room for redemption and transformation. The connection between them grew stronger, and Clara began to believe that perhaps they could both find a new path together. The following days were an emotional roller coaster for Clara. While her mother fought for her life in the hospital, Clara divided her time between being a worried daughter and someone trying to help Richard get back on his feet. The bond between them grew stronger, But the pain of the past still haunted her, and Clara struggled to balance her feelings. Richard was determined to change. He began to open up about his life, sharing stories from his childhood and the mistakes that led to his arrogance. Clara listened attentively, realizing that behind the facade of a mogul was a vulnerable man who had lost everything. "He's not the same man who humiliated me," Clara thought, but doubt still lingered. One night, while Clara sat by her mother's bedside, she received a message from Richard. "I'm thinking of you. How is your mother?" The concern in his words touched her, but at the same time, the memory of the pain he had caused was still fresh in her mind. "How can I trust him?" she thought, the internal struggle consuming her. After a long day at the hospital, Clara decided she needed some time for herself. "I'm going for a walk," she said to Richard, who accompanied her to the door. "You don't have to do this alone," he insisted, but Clara needed a moment of solitude. Walking through the streets of New York, Clara got lost in thought. Memories of her former life haunted her, and the pain of humiliation was still present. "Why am I doing this?" she thought, confusion consuming her. "Why am I helping Richard?" As she walked, Clara remembered her own journey of overcoming. She had fought to rise again after losing her husband, and the humiliation she endured. "If I manage to overcome this, maybe Richard can too," she reflected. But doubt still lingered. What if he doesn't change? What if I get hurt again? Upon returning to the hospital, Clara found Richard waiting for her. "I was worried," he said, concern etched on his face. "You shouldn't be alone." "I needed some time to think," Clara replied, trying to hide the confusion she felt. "I don't know if I can keep helping you." Richard looked her in the eyes, and Clara saw vulnerability in his gaze. "I understand that you have doubts. I'm not the person you once knew, but I'm trying to change, and I need you by my side." The sincerity in his words touched her, but Clara still struggled with her feelings. "What if I get hurt again? What if you're not who you say you are?" she asked, pain evident in her voice. "I can't promise that I'll be perfect, but I can promise that I will try. And if you give me a chance, I want to show you that I can be better," Richard said, determination evident in his voice. Clara hesitated, feeling her internal struggle intensify. "I want to believe in you, but it's hard. I can't just forget." "What happened?" she said, vulnerability clear in her words. "I don't expect you to forget, but I hope you can give me a chance to prove that I've changed," Richard replied, hope in his eyes. "I want to be a better person, not just for myself, but for you and everyone around me." Clara took a deep breath, feeling the pressure in her chest. "All right, I'll give you a chance, but we need to set boundaries. I can't get hurt again," she said, determination in her voice. "I understand," Richard replied, a grateful smile on his face. "And I promise I'll do my best." As they talked, Clara realized that despite her doubts, there was a growing connection between them. The internal struggle she faced was difficult, but the idea of helping Richard redeem himself also inspired her. "Maybe together we can find a new path," she thought, feeling a wave of hope. In the days that followed, Clara and Richard worked together to face the challenges that arose. Richard began to get involved in community activities, helping people in difficult situations, and Clara accompanied him whenever she could. With each step, Clara saw Richard transforming, and the connection between them grew stronger. But even with the progress, Clara still struggled with her emotions. The pain of the past didn't easily fade, and she wondered if she could truly trust Richard. "I need to be strong," she thought, determined not to let fear control her. One night, while they were together, Richard looked her in the eyes and said, "Clara, I know you're struggling, and I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what happens." His words touched Clara's heart, and she realized that despite her doubts, there was something special between them. "Maybe I can trust him," she thought, feeling a wave of hope. "Maybe together we can overcome our pasts and find a better future." As the weeks went by, Clara and Richard became a team. They supported each other in their journeys of healing. and the connection between them deepened each day. Richard was determined to change, and Clara began to see the man he could become, rather than the one he had been. Richard got involved in community activities, helping to organize events to raise funds for people in need. Clara accompanied him whenever she could, and together they visited shelters and support centers, offering help and hope to those who needed it most. With each smile they received in return, Clara felt her heart warm. This is what really matters, she thought, realizing that true happiness came from helping others. One afternoon, while organizing a fundraising event, Clara and Richard were together in a meeting room. Richard was explaining his ideas for the event, and Clara watched him with admiration. "You really care about this, don't you?" she asked, smiling. "Yes, I care. I want to make a difference," Richard replied, passion evident in his voice. "And I want you to know that you are an important part of this. You've shown me what it means to be empathetic." Clara felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "I'm just doing what I can," she said, a bit embarrassed. But deep down, she knew that Richard's transformation was also a reflection of her own journey. "We're growing together," she thought, feeling grateful to have someone by her side. As they worked together, Clara began to open her heart to Richard. She shared stories about her life, about the pain of losing her husband, and the struggle to raise Lily alone. Richard listened attentively, and Clara realized that he truly cared. "He's not the same man who humiliated me," she thought, feeling more at ease with him each day. One night, after a long day of work, Clara and Richard sat on a bench in the park, gazing at the stars. The sky was clear, and the gentle breeze brought welcome relief after a tiring day. "You know, I never thought I could feel this way again," Clara said, looking at the stars. "After everything I've been through, I thought I would never be happy again." Richard looked at her with a soft smile. "You deserve to be happy, Clara. We all do," he said, sincerity in his voice touching her heart. "And I want to be part of your happiness." Clara felt a flutter in her stomach. "Richard, I don't know if I'm ready for that," she said hesitantly. "I'm still afraid of what happened in the past." "I understand, and I don't want to rush anything, but I want you to know that I'm here for you no matter what happens," Richard replied, holding her hand. His touch made her feel a wave of comfort, but it also made her nervous. "What if I get hurt again?" she thought, doubt still present. "I want you to trust me," Richard said, sensing her internal struggle. "I'm trying to be a better person, and I want you to see that." Clara looked into his eyes, and for the first time she felt she could trust him. "All right, I'll try," she said, determination in her voice. "But we need to take it slow." "I agree," Richard replied, a grateful smile on his face. "Let's take it one step at a time." In the days that followed, Clara and Richard continued to work together, and the connection between them grew stronger. They laughed together, shared moments of vulnerability, and gradually, Clara began to open her heart. The pain of the past was still present, but the idea of a future together began to seem possible. One night, while they were organizing a fundraising event, Clara noticed that Richard was more excited than ever. "I have a surprise for you," he said, a sparkle in his eyes. "What is it?" Clara asked, curious. "I've organized a dinner for the two of us to celebrate everything we've done together," Richard replied with a smile. "I want you to know how important you are to me." Clara felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "That's so kind of you," she said, touched. "I would love that." On the night of the dinner, Clara dressed carefully, choosing a dress that made her feel confident. When she arrived at the restaurant, Richard was waiting for her with a radiant smile. "You look stunning," he said, and Clara felt her heart race. During dinner, they talked and laughed, sharing stories and dreams. Clara realized that despite her insecurities, there was something special between them. "Maybe I can really trust him," she thought, feeling more at ease with each moment. As the evening progressed, Richard took Clara's hand and said, "I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what happens, and I want to build a future by your side." Clara looked into his eyes, and for the first time, She felt she could believe in a future together. "I want that too," she said, emotion evident in her voice. "But we need to keep working on ourselves." "I'm willing to do that," Richard replied, a sincere smile on his face. "Together, we can overcome anything." As the night came to an end, Clara realized that despite the difficulties, there was hope. The connection between them was growing stronger, and Clara began to believe that together they could find a new path. As Clara and Richard continued to work together and build their connection, life seemed more promising. However, the shadow of the past still loomed over them, and Clara knew she needed to confront her fears and insecurities. The internal struggle she faced intensified, and the doubt about Richard's true nature still haunted her. One morning, while they were organizing a fundraising event, Clara noticed that Richard seemed more distant than usual. He appeared lost in thought, and concern began to grow within her. "Richard, are you okay?" she asked, trying to break the silence. "Yeah, I'm fine," he replied. But Clara wasn't convinced. "You don't seem fine. What's going on?" she insisted. Richard hesitated, looking down at the floor. "It's just that I'm afraid you'll discover who I really am," he said, vulnerability evident in his voice. "I don't want you to be disappointed in me." Clara felt a tightness in her heart. "Richard, I'm here because I want to help you. I see the effort you're making to change," she said, trying to encourage him. "But you need to be honest with me." "I know, and I want to be. But there are things about my past that I haven't shared with you," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I don't want you to see me as the man I was. We all have a past, Richard. What matters is what we do with now," Clara replied, trying to be understanding. "But you need to tell me. I can't help you if I don't know the truth." Richard took a deep breath, struggling with his emotions. I used to be very arrogant. I didn't care about people, only about money and power. And when I lost everything, I realized I had no one by my side. I became a lonely person," he said, pain evident in his words. Clara looked him in the eyes, realizing the depth of his struggle. "And you're trying to change that now. That's what matters," she said, trying to comfort him. "But you need to be honest about what happened." "I did terrible things, Clara. I manipulated people, used them for my own benefit. And when I realized I was alone, it was like everything crumbled," Richard confessed, the pain in his voice breaking Clara's heart. "I don't want you to see that in me. I'm not here to judge you, Richard. I'm here to help you," Clara replied, sincerity in her voice. "But you need to trust me." Richard hesitated, but finally decided to open up. "There was a time when I made a deal that hurt many people. I didn't care about the consequences, only about the profit. And now I carry that guilt with me," he said, his voice choked. Clara felt a wave of empathy. "We all make mistakes, Richard. What's important is to learn from them and try to do better," she said, trying to comfort him. "You're doing that now. I want to be a better person, but sometimes I feel like I don't deserve it," he admitted, pain evident in his gaze. "I don't know if I can redeem myself." "You can, but you need to be willing to face your past and work to change," Clara replied, determination in her voice. "And I'll be here to support you." Richard looked at her with gratitude, and Clara realized that despite her insecurities, there was something special between them. "Maybe together we can overcome our pasts and find a better future," she thought, feeling a wave of hope. In the days that followed, Clara and Richard continued to work together, but Clara's internal struggle persisted. She wondered if she could truly trust Richard, and if he was capable of change. What if he goes back to being who he was, she thought, doubt consuming her. One night, while they were together, Clara decided she needed to be honest about her own fears. "Richard, I want to believe in you, but I'm still afraid of what happened in the past," she said, vulnerability evident in her voice. "I understand, Clara, and I don't want you to feel that way," Richard replied, holding her hand. "I'm here to show you that I've changed, but I need you to trust me. I want to trust you, but it's hard. The pain of the past is still fresh in my mind, Clara said, the internal struggle evident in her gaze. I can't change what I did, but I can show you that I'm a different person now, Richard said, sincerity in his voice touching Clara's heart. And I want you to see that. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the pressure in her chest. All right, I'll try to trust you, but we need to keep working on ourselves, she said, determination in her voice. I'm willing to do that, Richard replied, a grateful smile on his face. Together we can overcome anything. As they talked, Clara realized that despite the difficulties, there was hope. The connection between them was growing stronger, and Clara began to believe that together they could find a new path. The bond between Clara and Richard grew stronger each day, but Clara's internal struggle still persisted. She knew she needed to face her fears and insecurities if she truly wanted to allow Richard into her life. The pain of the past was still present, but the idea of a future together was starting to seem possible. One morning, as they prepared for the fundraising event they had organized, Clara noticed that Richard was more excited than ever. I'm so pumped about this. It's going to be a great opportunity to help people, he said, a sparkle in his eyes. I'm excited too, Clara replied, feeling the positive energy radiating from him. But we need to make sure everything is perfect. As they worked together, Clara began to notice that Richard had transformed into a kinder and more considerate man. He cared about the people around him and was willing to do whatever it took to help. He really is changing, Clara thought, feeling more confident in her decision to support him. On the day of the event, the bistro was filled with people, all eager to contribute and make a difference. Clara and Richard were busy organizing tables and welcoming guests. The atmosphere was electric, and Clara felt a wave of hope seeing so many people united for a common cause. As the event progressed, Clara and Richard took turns mingling with the guests, chatting and thanking everyone for their presence. With each smile and word of gratitude, Clara felt her heart warm. This is what really matters, she thought, realizing that true happiness came from helping others. At the peak of the event, Richard took to the stage to give a speech. Clara watched him from the audience, feeling proud of him. He really cares about this, she thought, admiring his determination. Thank you all for being here today, Richard began, his voice firm and clear. Today, we are not just here to raise funds, but to show that together we can make a difference. I am an example that we can all change. I made mistakes, but I am here to redeem myself and help those in need. His words resonated in the room, and Clara felt a wave of emotion. He's really opening up, she thought, admiring his courage. This is what it means to be genuine, Richard continued. I want to especially thank Clara, who has been a light in my life. She has shown me what empathy and kindness mean, and I am eternally grateful for that. Tears streamed down Clara's face. The sincerity in Richard's words touched her deeply. He really has changed, she thought, feeling more confident in her decision to support him. After the speech, the event was a success. The donations exceeded all expectations, and Clara and Richard were beaming. We did it, Clara exclaimed, hugging Richard enthusiastically. That was amazing. Yes, it was. And it's all thanks to you, Richard replied, holding her tightly. I couldn't have done this without you. As they celebrated the success of the event, Clara realized that there was something special between them. The connection they had built was stronger than any pain from the past. Maybe I can really trust him, she thought, feeling a wave of hope. In the days that followed, Clara and Richard continued to work together, but the dynamic between them had changed. The vulnerability they had shared brought them even closer, and Clara began to open up about her own fears and insecurities. One night, while they were together, Clara decided it was time to be honest about her feelings. Richard, I want you to know that I'm starting to believe in you. You really are changing, and I admire that, she said, sincerity in her voice. That means a lot to me, Clara. I want you to know that I'm here for you no matter what happens, Richard replied, holding her hand. And I want to build a future by your side. Clara looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she felt she could believe in a future together. "I want that too," she said, emotion evident in her voice. "But we need to keep working on ourselves." "I'm willing to do that," Richard replied, a sincere smile on his face. "Together we can overcome anything." As they talked, Clara realized that despite the difficulties, there was hope. The connection between them was growing stronger, and Clara began to believe that together they could find a new path. That night, as they prepared for bed, Clara looked at Richard and said, "Thank you for being by my side. I don't know what I would do without you. I'm here for you, Clara." "I always will be," Richard replied with a warm smile. "And together we will build a better future." Clara smiled, feeling a wave of hope. Yes, together, she thought, believing that despite the challenges, a new beginning lay ahead. Months passed since the fundraising event that united Clara and Richard in a way they never imagined. Life in New York had transformed for both of them, and the city that once symbolized pain had now become a place of hope and renewal. Clara had found a new balance in her life. Her mother had fully recovered, and their relationship had strengthened. Clara also dedicated herself to helping other single mothers, sharing her story, and offering support to those facing similar challenges. The Café de Esperanza became a space where women could gather, share experiences, and find strength in one another. Richard, for his part, continued his journey of redemption. He became involved in community projects, helping to rehabilitate areas of the city that needed attention. His determination to make a difference inspired many, and he became a respected figure in the community. The transformation Clara had seen in him had come to fruition, and Richard had become a man who truly cared for others. One afternoon, as Clara and Richard walked together in the park, they stopped to watch the children playing. "Look how happy they are," Clara said, smiling. "It's beautiful to see their innocence." "Yes, it is. And I want our children to have a better future," Richard replied, holding Clara's hand. "I want to build a life by your side." Clara looked at him, feeling a wave of love and gratitude. "I want that too, Richard. You've become such an important part of my life," she said, emotion evident in her voice. "I never thought I could find someone like you," Richard said, looking into her eyes. "You've shown me what it means to love and be loved, and I promise I will always be here for you." "I trust you," Clara replied, feeling stronger than ever. "Together we can face any challenge." As they walked, Clara realized that the pain of the past had dissipated. She had learned to forgive not just Richard, but also herself. "The past doesn't define who we are," she thought, feeling free. That day, Richard took her to a small seaside restaurant where they had planned a special dinner. Upon arriving, Clara was surprised to see that the place was decorated with flowers and candles. "What's all this?" she asked, admiring the beauty of the setting. "I wanted to do something special for us," Richard replied with a smile. "You deserve this and so much more." During dinner, they talked about their dreams and hopes for the future. Clara shared her vision of helping more people, and Richard spoke about his plans to expand his community projects. The connection between them grew stronger, and Clara realized that together they could make a difference. After dinner, Richard stood up and, with a serious look, said, "Clara, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. You are the reason I've become a better person, and I can't imagine a future without you by my side." Clara felt her heart race. "Richard, I want that too. You've become an essential part of my life," she replied, emotion evident in her voice. Richard knelt down, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Clara Thompson, will you marry me?" he asked, a hopeful smile on his face. Tears streamed down Clara's face as she looked at the ring. "Yes, yes, I will," she exclaimed, happiness overflowing in her heart. Richard slipped the ring onto her finger, and they stood up, embracing tightly. "I promise I will always be here for you, in every moment," Richard said, holding Clara's face in his hands. "Together we will build a bright future." Clara smiled, feeling more alive than ever. Yes, together, she thought, believing that despite the challenges, a new beginning lay ahead. And so Clara and Richard began a new journey, a path filled with love, hope, and the certainty that together they could overcome any obstacle. The past had been painful, but now, with open hearts and renewed determination, they were ready to face the future. Wow, what an incredible journey, right? Clara and Richard's story teaches us that even after the greatest humiliations and challenges, there is always room for redemption and forgiveness. Clara, a strong and determined woman, showed us that true strength comes from facing our fears and opening our hearts, even when it feels risky. And Richard, on the other hand, reminded us that we all have a past, but what truly matters is what we do with it in the present. Now, I want to know from you. What would you do if you were in Clara's place? Could you forgive someone who hurt you in the past? Leave your reflections in the comments. Let's create a dialogue about how forgiveness and empathy can transform our lives. If you enjoyed this story and want to follow more emotional narratives like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support is essential for us to continue bringing content that touches hearts and inspires change. And if you're curious to know what else we have to offer, don't miss our next video, where we'll explore another story of overcoming and love that will surely move you. Check out the other videos on the channel and dive into more stories that make you reflect and dream. Thank you for being with us today. Until next time.